You can support us by subscribing. The war between Russia and Ukraine is escalating, and the Russian army is disappearing in Ukraine day by day. In the last 2 weeks, the Russian army lost about 15,000 troops, and the average daily loss of soldiers is over 1,000 these days. The Ukrainian army is blockading the Russians. In eastern and southern Ukraine, where conflicts are intensifying, the Russian army is stuck in its trenches. The Russian army can hardly conduct offensive operations. Missile and kamikaze UAV attacks, which Russia has been carrying out systematically for several months, come from the Crimea and the Russian Black Sea Fleet. The Ukrainian army, after the great offensive in the south in the early autumn, set its target as Crimea and cleared Kherson, which is the gate of the peninsula, from Russian occupation in the past months. After the capture of Kherson, the Ukrainian army launched a series of missile and UAV attacks against the Crimea and the Russian Black Sea Fleet. As the Ukrainian army approached Crimea, Russian citizens there panicked. The Kremlin initiated the evacuation of its citizens living in Crimea. According to 2021 figures, 1.9 million Russian citizens lived there, and now about 20% of them have left. A Ukrainian official said in a statement that his country is preparing offensive brigades to retake occupied territory, including parts of the eastern Donbass and the Black Sea Peninsula Crimea, which Russia illegally annexed in 2014. The announcement came from National Police Chief Ihor Klimenko, who was appointed as the country's acting interior minister. In a press release, Klimenko said that Ukraine has set up assault brigades, which will consist of police and border guards and have the purpose of liberating our lands. Klimenko says, "These are the people who went through the 2014-2015 crucible, some of whom fought in 2022. Some are injured. The units will be made up entirely of volunteers who act with a sense of patriotism, and there are many such people in our country." In the Crimean Offensive Brigades, the Southern Front is established under the military command and the Ukrainian Naval Forces command. Many third-generation main battle tanks in the new military aid package from the West will also be part of this offensive. HIMARS Artillery Brigade's new 150-kilometer GLSDB missiles are also a big part of this plan. The Ukrainian Armed Forces is currently forming at least 30 assault brigades alongside the elite brigades defending Kherson and its environs. It is expected that there will be 40 brigades in total in the Crimean offensive. This means a Ukrainian offensive force of about 130,000 soldiers. Earlier in November, the Ukrainian army had besieged Kherson with about 70,000 troops and more than 100 tanks, and the Russian army had been humiliated by retreating without engagement. More will undoubtedly be required for the Crimea. In November, there was a Russian force of about 30,000 troops in Kherson. However, the Russian military presence in the Crimea is much stronger, and there is a Russian occupation force of at least 50,000 troops. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the withdrawal of Russian troops from all regions, including Crimea, is essential for the end of the war, which is approaching its anniversary. In a televised speech at the end of the summer, he vowed to retake the peninsula, saying that the Ukrainian army has maintained its goal of recapturing Crimea since its annexation. Klimenko said that the decision to form assault brigades was taken by our employees, who had enough fury to defeat the enemy. He says, "Most of our soldiers who defended our country took the initiative to recruit people into such troops. Therefore, it was decided to unite in such brigades all those who are willing, patriotic, who have lost their home or relatives due to the war. We have already begun to form associations aimed at liberating our lands and reaching internationally recognized borders." Klimenko was referring to Crimea, which was captured by Russian President Vladimir Putin 9 years ago, after phony referendums that were labeled illegitimate by the international community. Crimea is internationally recognized as Ukrainian territory occupied by the Russian Federation. There are fears that retaking Crimea would be a red line for Russia, and that Putin could use his country's nuclear capabilities to defend the region. The head of the Crimean Civil Assembly, Alexander Formanchuk, said this week that he believes a global nuclear war will break out immediately if any attempt is made to return Crimea to Ukrainian control. Alexander Formanchuk says that Russia will not forgive this. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense intelligence chief, Major General Kirill Budanov, said that the Ukrainian army must do everything to ensure that Crimea returns home by the summer. Last fall, Russia announced that it had annexed the partially occupied regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia through illegal referendums. Russia does not have full control of any of these territories, and foreign governments, including the United States, have called this move illegitimate. The next 6 months will witness a great human tragedy. The Ukrainian armed forces will face difficult war conditions, and Ukrainian civilians will continue to endure daily Russian attacks. Meanwhile, Russia's poorly equipped and ill-managed troops will inflict thousands of casualties, destroying the country's remaining fighting capability. According to US Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley, the Russian military has already suffered more than 120,000 deaths and injuries, and thousands more will die this winter, thanks to the Kremlin's callous disregard for human life and the negligence and brutal indifference of the regime of President Vladimir Putin. With the help of the newly promised Western tanks and other weapons, the Ukrainian armed forces will liberate more areas in the east and south of the country, which will make it possible to imagine a final Ukrainian operation to retake Crimea. The peninsula, which was illegally annexed by Putin in 2014, served as a preparation area for Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Now, the invasion of Crimea allows the Russian army to threaten Ukrainian positions from the south and provides a forward base for Russia to launch long-range attacks on the Black Sea Fleet. But for the first 9 months of the war, Kiev's Western supporters were reluctant to support any military effort to return the region to Ukraine. For most of the past year, while the idea of liberating Crimea remained academic, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was willing to put aside the question of the region's near-term status. Ukrainian forces were focused on liberating the occupied territories outside the peninsula, and the future of Crimea seemed to be determined by diplomatic negotiations after the war's end. But as the war progressed, and Ukraine liberated much of its territory from invading Russian forces, Zelensky's rhetoric about Crimea changed. Speaking at the World Economic Forum held in Davos, Switzerland last month, Zelensky said, "Crimea is our land, our territory. Give us your weapons. The Ukrainian army will take back what is ours." According to US officials, the Biden administration began to come to the conclusion that Ukraine may need to threaten Russia's presence on the peninsula to strengthen its negotiating position, despite the risk of escalating the conflict. If serious negotiations were to begin soon, Zelensky might still be open to an agreement that would end the war and postpone the Crimean question until a later date. But if the conflict continues throughout the spring and summer, and Ukraine liberates important lands and inflict huge losses on Russia, it will become increasingly difficult for Zelensky to authorize Putin a salvageable exit and allow Russia's ongoing but temporary occupation of Crimea. By the summer, it looks like Ukraine will begin targeting more of Russia's military infrastructure in Crimea in preparation for a broader campaign to liberate the peninsula. Doing so would put Putin at the negotiating table and could lead to an opening for diplomatic talks, while the final status of Crimea remains uncertain. However, this is by no means guaranteed to be successful. The Biden administration should help Ukraine end the war quickly and definitively, rather than let the conflict continue through the winter. Doing so could save both Ukraine and Russia from a new war year tragedy by allowing the final status of Crimea to be determined by negotiation rather than force. It would also secure Ukrainian democracy, discourage authoritarian powers from considering military aggression in the future, and reduce the risk of a nuclear escalation that could escalate into an existential conflict. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Our contents are carefully prepared by our expert team. This content only belongs to Divine Justice YouTube channel. We will take legal action against all channels, social media platforms, and websites that use our content without permission. Thank you for watching us.